Thank you.
East of West.
Everybody get their East of West. When we have the same East of West. Very good.
This is
Very
the best
good.
East of West.
Yeah, I only just right before starting this realized that it has that one shot the world at the end of it. Yeah, which is a lot of additional
not to be a
material.
show off, but I also have volume 2.
And probably volume 3 when it comes out in like a year and a half or whenever.
Whenever they do.
Yeah.
Whenever.
Whenever. When Win calls in.
Oh,
when Win wrote in.
One of the best lexical tricks that there's been.
Jeff.
I told you that Heather stopped using the word win in conversation because I would make it stupid jokes, right?
Yeah, and it makes sense. It's just such a good, unique name. Django, are we ready for an intro? Are we doing this?
Yeah, let's. I think people might even be able to see us on Facebook Live. We're live to the world right now. As much of the world as can stand us.
I don't do anything unless there's a bunch of people watching me. Learned it from my buddy. Welcome to a perfectly acceptable podcast one-shot book club edition. I don't know. We're
learned it from my buddy.
Yeah. Oh no. Yeah. I don't know. Actually, is there an audio lag? Is that? And where every week. Oh, my intro momentum. All of my juice spilled just there. But this is our live streamed book discussion video cast that kind of just sprung up out of a Google Hangout conversation that we had with a bunch of the folks in the room last week and some other folks that were not or are not or might be showing up. But it came out that a lot of us had put East of West off until a time where maybe all of it was going to be finished or collected and we'd be able to read it and digest it all then. And turns out it ended a couple months before coronavirus. So like the universe said, you should do it now. And so we said, okay, we'll do it now.
I'm excited to get through it. I mean, I'm more than one volume in. I'm about 2.5 volumes in, and I'm really enjoying it. I don't get to read this kind of thing in this way very often because there's such a weekly grind of comics. And so to be able to just sit down and plow through this many pages of super dense Hickman world building has been really cool.
Well, now, Django, I'll ask a favor, which is that you have this enormous brain and vision and scope of the world around you at all times. But now, given the fact that you're a couple volumes into East of West as well, what I'm going to need you to do is rein that scope in and just sit here with me on an island of 5 issues, 1 volume. Pretend you don't have the wisdom of the oracles sort of filtered into that gorgeous brow.
I'll do my best, but I know who dies.
Oh no.
Or who doesn't.
No. Okay. Well, so yeah, I am just, I had the intention of just sort of like re-skimming the first 5 issues today with my eyes, trying to not read it, and I loved engaging with it a second time to the point where I ended up reading like 3 of the 5 issues again just today, because like it was very cool to be reading it the first time. It was way more rewarding the second time because as so often like with Jonathan Hickman's work, it is kind of a puzzle that fits together. And when you do have the context or the information that generally is dispersed in a very not charitable manner, when you have that information, it kind of clicks everything that you've already read back into place.
So I just reread a portion of the first issue again today, and it's been a couple weeks, and I'm super impressed at just how much more a little bit of context helps with who's who and what's going on. So yeah, I think rereading it, this is a book that's going to be easy and fun to reread once you get to the end.
Well, on the topic of context, some of the folks who were in the version of this that was going to be yesterday that then technology dystopianed on us. I did mention this, but I'm going to toss a little context out there again for everybody. So the first issue of East of West came out on March 27th, 2013, almost exactly a year after the first issue of Manhattan Projects had come out.
Almost exactly 7 years ago.
Wow, you're right. March. Whoa.
Yeah, okay. Buddy.
Took 7 years for 45 issues to come out. A couple other issues that came out on the same week as this first issue. It was month 18 of the DC's New 52. So all DC books were at issue 18. except for Batman Incorporated, which was at issue number 9. Spoilers, that's the issue after Damian died. And it was the same week as Guardians of the Galaxy number 1 from Bendis, so ramping up for the Guardians movie. Young Avengers number 3 by Gillen and McKelvey, and Age of Ultron number 3 from Bendis.
Nice.
So I think it's really interesting to see exactly sort of. I just remember going into the shop that week, you know, and it's interesting to put myself in that position. And it's the second time, it's like the second series that Nick Dragotta and Hickman had done together. They first did a single issue together, but most prominently they had done some of Hickman's FF run. And Dragotta had really only done he did like How Toons, Marvel Zombies. He did one issue of Ecstatics, which like Allred, Dragotta, Paul Pope, Darwin Cook, like that is Ecstatics had good artists on it.
That's huge.
Let's just divert this, all that. And then getting into this was the original pitch that Hickman gave for this series. So like when we ordered this comic, this is what it was. The things that divide us are stronger than the things that unite us. The end times are imminent and we all hate each other too much to come together and solve our problems. Our final destination is imminent and it is the apocalypse. And then in the face of all that despair and gloom, somehow there is still hope. Interesting.
That doesn't sound relevant at all.
Yeah. I know, right? It's super interesting to be reading this right now. I have sort of actively avoided dystopian apocalypse into the world fiction. And yet here we are.
Yeah, it's definitely that. And it's like just the amount of politics that they cover in this. The whole thing is political backstabbing and you know, even the Horsemen of the Apocalypse are kind of a political entity in this, which is an interesting take on that.
Yeah, I love the idea of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse being less a force of nature and more 4 buddies who aren't buddies right now. You know, like introducing social dynamics and falling out and jealousy and retribution into the dynamic of the 4 people or things who are going to be ushering in the apocalypse is a pretty interesting fold there.
So
now, yeah, sorry.
Oh, I was going to say your name, but it sounded like you were about to say my name. So Jeff, I promised everybody on Facebook a little bit earlier today that you would be giving us a 70-second synopsis of East of West. Go.
Volume 1. Okay. It essentially follows okay, I won't play it all out in the way the information comes across, but we are introduced to 3 of the horsemen of the apocalypse at the very beginning, and they are missing one of their horsemen. And we meet that 4th horseman who's out for some reason doing a retribution thing. He's out looking for people and gathering information, but ultimately what this is one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse has defected. And what we learn near the end of this volume is the reason that he defected is because he fell in love and ultimately had a child. And because that upset the other horsemen of the apocalypse, they tried to kill him, the woman that he was with, and their child. And he makes some sort of deal to not die and not be reincarnated with the other horsemen of the apocalypse. So now he's still alive, and he is out looking for his child, who the woman he was with doesn't realize is still alive. And those are sort of the machinations of the main players, but all of that is sort of happening within the political sphere of near the beginning of the 1900s. Through some sort of oracle-like things, several different people got portions of a message that preordained how the world was going to end. And 50 years after receiving the end of that message, it was put together and kind of realized what was happening. And the 7 people who received that message and sort of made sense of it are very, very important political figures now. And they're sort of the people governing society and culture on the earth. And one really important thing that I think was glossed over, a thing that I think is important, is that around like 1930 or something, a giant like nuclear bomb went off, it seems like. And that seems to be the moment where it seems like technology is advancing a bit quicker in this reality than our own reality, because this is an alternate history. That's the moment where it seems like maybe there was some outside force that introduced technology prematurely. Up until that point, things maybe seemed like they were going the same.
So I think maybe we're reading a different comic, because
Oh,
none of that
no.
happened in this volume.
Well, he's a good cop, though.
He is a good cop. That was really good, and I don't know that I could have enunciated all of that succinctly. I just like the pretty colors and the art and the landscapes. Like it feels like you're in Wyoming, because I think some of the time you maybe are. The cowboy aspects of the Four Horsemen is something that I'm really, really enjoying in here. And
it's super interesting, because Hickman was talking about how this was going to be a sort of cyber dystopian with really just sort of Western elements thematically, but Dragotta was kind of the one who had such a strong Western vibe that Hickman was like, all right, well, I guess we have to go with that.
Yeah, I mean, like from the opening page, it's just
3 pages later when the smoke is going up is one of my, like, that was the page that I remember being like, whoa, like the 3-colored smoke.
It's so good. The whole setting is just fabulous. And the, Death, the kind of good guy throughout the whole thing, is in classic Hickman stark white skin, and his sidekicks are a mix of like dark skin, like black skin with white highlights, and white skin with black highlights. So it's like hitting on all Hickman cylinders.
Well, and what's really interesting on that note is that in all the flashbacks, when we see Death, when he is a horseman of the apocalypse, he is all black, like clothing black, skin black, everything black. And then whatever deal he made to not have to die and be reincarnated is what has caused him to be this stark white, and now be tripping around with these other 2 stark white characters. So again, I haven't gotten further in, but from volume 1's vantage, I imagine that the 2 people that he's hanging out with, the crow and the wolf, are probably eternal or something, or are how he facilitated not dying. What is interesting to me, and what I want to talk about in this, and we can not get into this, we can waylay this until a little bit later, but the pacing of this is undeniably Hickman. It is like kind of what he does through and through. The first 3 issues, you aren't given enough information to understand really what's going on, and it's in issues 4 and 5 where we learn that he was in love and that he had a child, and that
and before that you're almost just following different major characters, but you don't see how they all tie together super well.
And I really like that, but it does make the first 3 issues feel more like work. Like you don't know what's going on, and it is taking effort to follow the thread. And then I had this audible like, oh, he had a child. Oh, it's still alive. And I really like that. And then now today, going back through it, I'm like, oh, all of this seeds, all of these conversations now make sense with this extra information that I have.
Right.
And I'm just curious how everyone else feels about that type of storytelling, because it's something that he does a lot. Like House and Powers does that. Many Hickman things all kind of do that thing where he has more information, he's slowly giving it to you. And I'm curious if people feel like that's a stylized thing, or can it also feel like maybe a thing that is Hickman-esque that like draws people away from it, or is actually maybe just poor writing? Like what other people think is.
What did you think, Wayne?
So the first time I read volume 1 was in trade, so I didn't read it in single issues. So I honestly just think about this about most of Hickman's stuff is I prefer it in trade typically. Like usually I'll try the first issue when it comes out. I do that with a lot of books just because I try to keep my singles issue under wraps, I say. As if I don't, constantly buy single issues that it takes me several months to read.
You like stuff to look good on your bookshelf, right?
Got
yeah,
it.
exactly.
I saw those East of West hardcovers. Hey, Win, can I show you? I showed other people in the chat this yesterday, but this is what happened to mine. So just watch your spine is all.
Okay. I honestly, like, since buying these, like, I've probably only actually like cracked them like maybe 2 or 3 times.
I think I
'Cause
took this one because it was a damage
yeah.
from the store is why I actually, if they show up
I
damaged.
totally get that. Like, there
Yeah.
are books that I have copies of because they came in as damages, and it's like, well,
Yeah.
I don't mind that they're damaged. But yeah, I'm completely on the same page with you. Like, those first few issues, it's very interesting world building. I'm a huge fan of like alternate history type settings, and especially especially like alternate history America, just because I'm a little bit of an American history nerd, really appeals to me. And also just anything that one moment. Oh,
Our meeting got extended.
Oh,
yay.
lucky us.
Thanks, Zoom.
Thank you for the pop-up computer. What was I saying? But yeah, like the first few issues, it's definitely a lot of, okay, this is really interesting, but how is this all connected? And then definitely in that fourth and fifth issue, when we're like, oh, okay, when we get to, what do they call it? Is it like New Shanghai? Is that what they
Yeah.
call it?
Yeah.
Yeah. When they get to New Shanghai and like shit starts literally blowing up,
Mm-hmm.
is when I was like, okay, now I'm getting what's going on. This is how all this all connects and makes sense.
Hey, Nathan, I see that you're in here now. I'm not sure if you got the 70-second summary. But I am curious where you're at with it. Like, yesterday when we had the brief chat, you were sort of like, what the hell is going on with this thing? Like, I need a foundation. And I'm curious if that provided enough of a foundation or any foundation at all for you, or did you have that moment like fourth, fifth issue in where things did start to click, or was he just sort of like doing a classic Hickman, like I'm going to cover your eyes and push you through the dark?
I skimmed / reread for this. Was kind of the third time today, a couple hours ago, and that's the first time that most of it clicked. I was talking to Matt Koff about it, and he said that I think where I was last night is where he is right now after his first read, or at least before you went over the part that you did. It came alive in so many different ways because after. There are just some comics that, like, I know Mike didn't feel like this when he read it, but some comics you just read and you're doing so much work, like you said, for the first couple of issues, but you're doing so much work to try to figure out what ground you're standing on, and then you are missing such cool parts about it, whether it's just like a cool piece of art or a phrase or something in there. And that stuff came alive way more today on my second full time through, but it's probably the fourth time I've read the first issue and a half.
You know what I thought was really interesting about the pacing of the series is that reading it in a book like this, I don't know when an issue is over, because it seems like there's like a little vignette in the beginning, and then there's a big chunky meaty part of the story, and then like another little short bit at the end, and then another issue is maybe started or maybe not, and I'm totally lost as I'm reading the
Got any
trades.
more of those blank title pages, Hickman? Any more of them? Come on.
More of that white stuff, that real good white stuff.
White pages.
Just a big old white page there.
I had a lot of thoughts about that specifically, about the white pages. It's a very, very Hickman thing, because I think particularly these blank pages with just text on them, and I think it's a thing that especially throws off established comics readers. There's a format that we're all used to. There are rules that we're used to, and taking an entire page of white space to just say some cryptic garbage it's not standard Stanley Jack Kirby playbook stuff. It's unusual. It takes you out of your flow a little bit, and I think that is intentional.
Oh yeah, it's Hickman saying, "I'm in charge of the beat."
Mm-hmm.
Right, I think it's not even. Yeah, I think it does weird things for the voice, because it's not the kind of voice, the kind of super objective, omniscient narrator voice that we'd be used to in a dialogue box, or like the super informal this is the voice of the writer that we're used to with like the old style Stan Lee comments or letter pages or whatever. It's always these blasts of very disassociated voice almost. I realized a way to describe it would be, imagine if you're reading Lord of the Rings and then every couple of chapters or so there's just a piece of card stuffed in between the pages, and it has something written on it like, you know, all wizards are liars, there are no wizards, or the eye is always watching, or the song should not be finished, it should not be said again. And imagine if that was the universal experience of reading Lord of the Rings. It would be insane. It would be bizarre. You'd be wondering what these cards were doing in there. And that's kind of what these pages do to the flow of reading it.
Yeah, I think that one instance of where it worked, I think really well, was in the final issue of this volume, where I if I remember correctly, but the first couple of pages are, you know, Uncle Sam looking guy talking to Solomon, and they're in some techno room. He's like, well, I love going to the zoo. And then it's like cut. And you're like, okay, what? And then we have a whole issue. And then it comes back to what was in the zoo. But throughout the course of that issue, when you're like, oh my God, they had a kid. Oh, the kid's still alive. And then like right before you turn the page to go back to these, you're like, oh my God, I bet that they have that kid in capture. Oh God, they do. Like it's, that's an instance of where I think it worked really well, but I don't always think that it does. And it's interesting. Hickman and Dragotta did an AMA on Reddit, like around the time 10 issues of this series had come out. And Hickman mentioned that he only started writing comic books because he wanted to do the art in comics and he didn't have anybody give him scripts. So he started writing just to be using his art. And I think it's so interesting that like such a unique writing voice is coming from someone who doesn't feel classically trained, didn't consider it their passion or their path, and yet they're Jonathan Hickman now.
I mean, so my brother's band is just a rock and roll funk band, but everybody in it was like first or second chair in the Loyola Orchestra. So it's like he's using his art muscles to write stories, maybe, if that makes any sense. Like he's arranging it in a way that you wouldn't necessarily expect from a writer.
What are some other bits that like worked really, really well in here for other folks, or bits that just like super, maybe you could feel what his execution was trying to be, but just fell flat? I've got a couple. Good. Yeah. Get it.
In favor of the white pages with the cryptic shit on them, I was just thinking of the end of issue 2, where it's like the flashback to 10 years ago when now I'm not remembering her name. You know, Death's lady.
Yeah.
His baby mama.
Yeah, Xiaolin. I think it's basically
Xiaolin. Yes.
Yeah.
But anyway, so it's like the scene where it's her and 3 of the horsemen. It's been a trap, and then they're about to throw down, and then it shows like the start of the fight, and then it's the white page that just says, "She lasted longer than you will," and it's like that. I love that transition, and I was checking to see when it is, but I know there's one of these, and I don't think it's in the first volume. Where it's like, I would tell you to pray, but you've earned what's coming for you, is one of my favorite one of those. Like, it's not in volume 1, but it's still like, I have that on a t-shirt.
Nice.
So what helped?
Volume 1.
Yeah, I mean, aside from this is basically a Triforce.
It is. Sure is.
With in the same tone of the white pages in there, what really kind of helped me have a better feel was just thinking of it as structured like an episode, like a TV show, where it's got kind of a cold open, then the meat of the show, and then maybe even a post credits, and then just kind of realizing that helped the flow of it. Thinking of it like, you know, almost like I'm watching, you guys mentioned, like watching Game of Thrones, where you just feel like you're struggling to catch up. And I felt like once they started telling the kind of the love story portion of it, once they kind of started bringing some of the humanity in it, it helped kind of ground you in this world where it just felt like they were throwing a lot of, crazy characters and concepts that were hard to keep up with. But once it was kind of more grounded, and the story almost kind of, I don't know, in a weird way reminded me like of Kill Bill or something.
Dude, Kill
But
Bill
just
is the thing. I was on my reread. I was like, this is basically Kill Bill.
Yeah, I kept thinking that over and over again. Just like this, really, a lot of this feels like Kill Bill from like, your child is still alive, like hitting some of those beats, and that's what kind of finally pulled me in, into the book once I got past all of this. I struggle to call it exposition, but just all of the world setting stuff
Was set up.
that
Oh yeah.
is very, very hard to keep up with. And like you said, I'm going to mentioned briefly yesterday, if I was reading this as single issues, it would have been a struggle for the first couple of issues. I don't know if I would have been excited to read issue number 2 or issue number 3, but reading it in a trade, made all the difference and made me, want to see what happens next. Even though I, you know, aside from like these are like the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and this guy strayed from them for one reason or another. Not really grasping all the other things that are going on or why they, killed the people that they've killed. I'm still excited to read more despite that, and I don't think it would have been the same reading it as single issues. I'm really fascinated to hear anybody who read it as single issues in the beginning and kept going with it.
I read 2 of them and bailed.
3 is where I bailed, which is that's the place where it's that would be the testing ground. Well,
it's interesting that he did it like that, because that he was writing this a little bit before it was super in vogue to write specifically for trades. Like things were tending in that direction, but it wasn't like this is written to read this way. I think
I agree, but I also like, and that's sort of what I'm interested in hearing other people's thoughts. Is just like it is a kind of inherently Hickman thing to like put make sure you know nothing and then almost painfully slowly dole out the information, and it works really well for me. But I can see it not working for other people.
And this is my second round of Hickman. Basically House of X was my first experience with Hickman. So but I have read a lot of Tom King, and it does remind me a bit of that, which is the same thing. Like I would say Tom King's probably my favorite writer, and it's a lot of similarities where it just reads so much better as a trader altogether than reading some of the single issues. Like, as great as Batman was, there was parts of it where you just felt lost.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of feel like it's the same thing where once you crunch it all together, it works so much more. But it's almost a shame that they just don't put them out in trades straight away instead of releasing the single issues.
Yeah, that is, and some companies are in the midst of sort of exploring that type of release.
TKO, TKD.
Yeah, TKO, TKD. Scout is doing some exploration with that. It's
even Image has put out some trades that don't have single issues.
Yeah, I
like
bet
Street Angel kind of stuff.
Probably just hard for those creators to be making the money to get 5 issues out ahead of time, whereas like if you do it issue by issue, you're getting small influxes of money per month, whereas if you were to be doing it at the paperback, it would require an advance from the company. I'm guessing,
because the only real example I can think of something that went straight to trade without singles, at least from Image, that has continued to sell well, was like Sunstone, and that had an online following before it was published. Like Esteban, or Bob, as he'll tell you to say his name, he was putting that out on DeviantArt well before the trades were ever even a distance imagining. So and now he's talking about kickstarting a statue with him, which I'm just like, Bob, take my money.
I have a quibble with East of West.
Oh, quibble away.
I had a really hard time with telling when things were happening, and I think that it's something that actually, like Hickman and Tom King are not super clear with timelines, and I don't know that I always need to have an exact, like, this is happening 15 minutes after that, but you have to use a lot of context clues in this and already know a bunch of characters and where they are in the present in order to figure out whether a thing that you're reading is happening now or in the past.
Yeah, I did a lot of math in the first 10 pages of okay, we're given a date of 1908, and then 30 years passes, and then 50 years passes. So where are we then? And then 2/3 of the way through issue 1, it just says 2064.
Right.
And then we
the
have
first day of the apocalypse or whatever.
Right. But yeah, it was I was trying to chart it all out. I totally agree, and I think that is probably a shortcoming that I won't credit to being stylized and would actually credit to being I wish you gave me some dates in there, buddy.
Yeah.
There's a specific part of that where it really threw me off, and I won't spoil it, but when Death kills a particular person and then the other horsemen kill a whole bunch of other people, that timeline of that really confused me, because when the first time I read it, I wasn't really sure. It threw me off because it made me think they were working together when I'm guessing they weren't. And so that just kind of left me completely befuddled.
That's the scene where there's political people standing up high watching everything go down, right?
Let's just, can we open up spoilers? There's just the 8 or 9 of us and we've all read the volume, or are we
the book came out in trade
2013,
5 years ago? Yeah.
I think spoilers are right.
So
because I'm just having a hard time picturing your scene.
I'm specifically talking about when Death kills the president.
Yeah.
And then they kill everybody else in the line of succession.
Yeah.
Oh,
Can we pause before we go to the next one?
Someone faithful.
I mean, guys.
That's a good shot.
Oh,
so good.
So Death kills the president because that was on the list that he got from the bartender. And then I think that the other horsemen are tracking Death, and they went to the bar and then found out they're basically tracking him. I think that they're working with Uncle Sam type guy, and they have been brought into the fold of the 7 because the 7 are basically trying to, and we don't have this information yet, but the 7 are basically trying to waylay the apocalypse. Mike, please jump in.
My impression was that ultimately the 7 have the message. So, and they generally seem to be on the track for making sure that the apocalypse kind of happens according to plan.
Mm-hmm.
And that is why the other 3 horsemen are killing all the other people in the line of succession, because none of them are believers in the message.
Right.
They want someone in the White Tower that they can manipulate, and that means someone faithful. And
someone that they had.
Means someone that
the president was that person.
Right.
The president was that person, yeah.
Okay.
And then Death killed him. And then they were like, shoot, we don't have anyone in, controlling the northern part of America. And remember as well that this is essentially an America where the Civil War was a stalemate.
And we know that the 7 are the ones who are responsible for trying to kill Death and killing his child. So Death is just out trying. Right, and Death's just out there trying to kill those 7, a la Kill Bill. And I think the 1/7 who's Uncle Sam looking, because he's secretly working against the 7, he's teamed up with the other 3 horsemen of the apocalypse.
I gotta say, I honestly didn't think about him looking like Uncle Sam at all until he started referring to him as such. Now I totally see that was what it was supposed to be. But I've always thought he looked more like Colonel Sanders.
Yeah, or and I'm not even thinking of I'm thinking of DC Comics Uncle Sam, Freedom Fighters Uncle Sam is who I think it looks like.
So are we not under the impression that the 3 horsemen are almost they're on the exact same method path as the Chosen? Aren't they all manufacturing the end of the world together?
Yeah.
So I don't think that's particularly with Colonel Uncle, right?
There was just
Colonel Uncle is kind of meant to be a wild card player, or at least
I think they're more aligned with
himself as a wild card to Death.
Yeah, he's in it for himself, I think.
Yeah, he doesn't want the
he's not
apocalypse.
necessarily against the message. He just is pro himself, is the feeling I get.
But then we get Belle Solomon, who is against it
Right.
and was never a part of it at all, which I thought was cool too. Like I feel like if we, you've already read another trade or two, but like that's your complaint about not having like the people. He felt like the people, which was odd because like big bad Texas is something in our world in a way, and then like it felt like, oh, little like incapable subservient Texas is what that made it feel like in this world.
Yeah, and I guess we haven't mentioned that tonight. One of my disconnects for the story is that we don't see a lot about the people underneath all the politics. So we're really focused on the high end politics and the really kind of high level machinations of all these people, and we don't see the fallout of what they do to people like you and me. And that's, that may change the farther we get in. I don't really know.
And last night when we were sort of having a preemptive conversation, that was sort of why I brought up Game of Thrones, because in my head I was thinking like, without adding an insurmountable page count, like, is it almost a trade-off? Like, to see up here and how the people in the rooms change things, like, does that take so much time that it would be too hard to see down here? And I'm more interested in up here. So you could do both. And I think Game of Thrones does do both to an extent. And I think there's other works of fiction that do as well. But I'm curious if it's a pretty common trade-off, because, the cogs at the center of the gear and how they affect the clock out here are so removed, unless you're Watchmen.
Yeah.
I think there's a reason why superhero comics work, and this isn't playing that game, probably to its own fault. I mean, the superhero comics are always have been the idea of the connection and the contrast between the super person and the not super person. And there's varying degrees of it, but I don't think this is pretending to be any part of that. It's not grounding itself at all. He thinks that his story could live up in highfalutin land all at once.
Well, but what we do have here is we've got the Horsemen of the Apocalypse as the superheroes and the politicians as the common man, right? So we've got like these superpowered beings and then normal people who are just a little bit better than you and me, but still in comparison they're just mortals.
Well, I to that point, I really like how, even though they are the Horsemen of the Apocalypse and they have these amazing powers and they're being reincarnated, and I love that War was reincarnated as a boy, and they're like, God, I had this powerful female body, now I'm a young boy, I hate this part. But I love that they are the powerful ones, and yet they just feel sort of like spiteful that Death didn't want to be a part of their club anymore. So they're like, well, fuck Shaolin, fuck you. Like, they're just like done with all of it. I just realized that with words like that, we can't be streaming on Facebook. But
we are, buddy. You're busted.
Lucky Facebook. But I do. A single issue of this series called The World came out. It's like a source book. Greg Rucka has done it for like Lazarus. It's not a terribly uncommon thing. But what Hickman did in that is in the back of this hardcover that Wynn and I are sporting around, is he put just a big old timeline, and now in a world post Hawks and Pox. Does any of this look familiar to anybody?
I was thinking the exact same thing as I was like refreshing my memory. I was like, oh my gosh, like,
just
Hickman, way to riff on yourself, dude.
See, for as much as he loves living in a world that seems to be completely throwing caution to the wind in terms of time, he loves the fact that he actually is following it all himself, whether he's telling us about it or not.
Yeah, he's the greatest chess player ever, and he doesn't care if you know that every move is perfect, because he does.
What bothers me about this, Jeff, is that he can do all this work on all these graphs, but he can't get Jean Grey's costume correct.
Yeah, you're right, Will. You're right. And I don't know who to blame. I don't know if I blame the editor. I don't know if I blame the other writers. I don't know if I blame an artist.
Or is it on purpose?
You actually answered the question for me the other week ago, and I don't want to pull it back to this old episode, but you answered the question, because you said all of the giant size books are done in the old Marvel style, where they send it off, and so it was the giant size with Jean Grey and
Dowderman,
whoever,
Emma Frost.
yeah. And that one was then done all by the artist, and then Hickman just came back and put in the words, but he didn't even put words into that. So I think that actually answered my question unknowingly.
Okay.
But I still want to gripe about it.
I appreciate it. And the fact that you're saying a question was answered is giving me more credit than I deserve.
So listen, can we talk about another similarity between Hoxpox and this? It's this big old helmet that this kid's wearing.
Oh yeah.
Hiding his eyes. I don't trust him.
That actually makes me like, we're talking about East of West right now, but now I'm just thinking more about that helmet, and especially
Dude
like
loves helmets.
No, especially because of like, oh man, I don't want to give spoilers for later volumes, but like the helmet does a thing in this that like fucks up a bunch of shit.
So Win, are you pretty far in this?
I have read all 6 volumes that are in hardcover.
Okay,
so
cool. Well then
I was like checking
Django,
to be like, where did volume 1 end?
Yeah, you and Django then are on a mountain that I'll ask you to put blinders on and pretend like you're down here with all of us.
Yeah, I keep peeking to be like, wait, when did this happen? Can I say something about that? No, don't say anything about that.
I mean, not to give any spoilers, but just kind of structure-wise, something that I noticed later on is that there are issues that focus on different characters and give you history and context for characters that we haven't even met yet.
Like an issue 5 type setup?
Yeah, a lot like that, where you get Zhao Lin's history, and I don't think I'm far enough to know if we've met all the major players yet or not, but even like 2.5 trades in, it feels like we're still meeting big important people, and I really like the structure that he's got on that.
Judging by the covers of issues and covers of paperbacks that I have seen and ordered, yes, I certainly don't know a lot of main players because they're hanging out on the cover of books, and I don't know who they are.
Yo, can we talk about like power? Somebody mentioned power earlier, but like, is death? They kind of mentioned a little bit that like Colonel Uncle said he was more scared of death than the other horsemen, but clearly he seems more capable right now. Well, and is that just because he's an adult, or like, is he stoppable? I mean, this is harder for the two of you who've read past, but like, it seems like, what are you going to do to him?
I interpreted that statement as, I fear the same thing that you fear, death. And I interpreted that as the concept of him dying and not actually the physical embodiment of death. So he's not.
I think that's what he was saying. Yeah, he was saying it about the concept, but it felt to me like I was being told as the reader what to feel. That death was something different than the other 3, which is obviously like what we're doing. Like death was conquered by love, the lotus, and the death resurrection of love. It feels like death in this is just supposed to be something different. So I'm wondering if that also correlates to the fact that we've also seen him as a more powerful being so far in what he's
got that
been
cool
able to
horse.
accomplish. Dude, yeah. Did we get that from Zhao?
The other 3, yeah, we haven't seen the other 3 yet really pull out the stops. We get that flashback, the start of the scene where they're about to fight Shaolin, and then it does that break. So we haven't really seen them. So it's kind of the ominous. You don't know how powerful they are. You don't know what,
because they're kids. Like that's what we're at right now with that, right?
That's true.
But you see that they slaughter a whole bunch of people and arrange them into the Triforce symbol.
Yeah,
and you're not even sure why they do.
What a sentence!
Yeah,
Zelda's darkest future.
Wisdom, power, and I don't remember what the third
courage,
one was.
Maybe
courage. That's it. Yeah.
Hey, Matt, how are you doing with all of this? Did you make it through it? How you feeling about it? Do you like it? Do you where are you at, buddy?
Yeah, I did like it. I texted Nathan earlier today after I'd finished it, because I started it at 1 a.m. last night and finished it at like, I can't remember, 12 this afternoon. So I sped through it, and I definitely want to reread it again before I go into volume 2. But I was telling Nathan that I can't wait until Jeff explains what the hell I just read. Mostly the first like 2 issues. I'm just like, you know, as everyone's touched on, it's like, what the hell? Where am I? Who is that? What am I doing here? But as it got to the Xiaolin story, and like she has the baby, it reminded me of Saga, and I was hooked. I was like, okay, cool. I love a good save the child. We're mad at each other because we love each other so much. So I'm really excited for the next bit of story because I really hope they get into their relationship.
I am both times I was reading through the last couple issues of this, I was like struck similarly by just that. Like, I love the story of like 2 people who wish they could still like each other, but like too much stuff has happened. And so like, he's just like, come on, we still like each other. She's like, no, you bailed, this happened. He's like, no, like you don't get it. And like, just like, I don't know, it's not a happy story, but I love the story of people who wish that they could still connect, but like the effect of time is that people grow apart.
You're not foreshadowing something in real life, are you?
Buddy, I have other relationships outside of you and I.
So I think that the general consensus is kind of that it starts off super confusing and kind of starts to gel around issue 4 and 5. Do you think that there's a different way that he could have arranged this that would have put you in the game quicker, or should issue 1 have been all 3 of those first issues in order to give you the context you need to go into like a workable issue 2, which is actually number 4?
And that's kind of what I was looking to start earlier, which is like, is it a good thing? Is it a flaw, or is it just style?
Mm-hmm.
So my thought on that is that, yeah, again, it's like the page breaks. It's all intentional in a way, because the other thing I was thinking about that is common in all of the Hickman that I've read or seen or observed is this kind of obsession with inevitable apocalypse. Like, it's present in Manhattan Project, it's in his Avengers stuff. There's
even the X-Men stuff.
He likes to instill, you know, in the plot, and I think deliberately in the readers, this feeling that they can't control anything, that things are happening and they can't really grasp what's going on because it's happening many levels above their head. And it's the deliberate, you know, it's why it's deliberate that there are so many of these, you know, little statements that are delivered in the second person. They're addressing you, the reader. You're not in the world. You're not part of the events that are going on. But he wants that line blurred. He wants the reader to feel that, you know, they have a personal stake in it, but also at the same time that they can't control anything that's going on in the plot. There's a futility to it that I think he wants the reader to feel.
I love that take on it, and I bought, like, they made an East of West shirt really early when this was coming out, and so I got it just because I've always loved this writer, and it's just a bunch of triangles and it says embrace nihilism.
I have that shirt. Yep.
Yeah, and it feels so true to what you were just saying of like this futility of like, you're not in control, you don't have any control, you don't even get to understand this story super well. Like,
I think what he's doing inadvertently, like, I don't give Hickman this credit, because if you've heard him do any interview ever, you don't think he's actually looking out for you. He's just doing a thing that he believes in. But he is providing a space where you're able to feel more rewarded than if he did like a network drama on television version of like saying, you know, what, even where he says New Shanghai, if he did that for every single timeline and every single place and every single setting, we wouldn't be having these discussions as much. Maybe it wouldn't contribute to the idea that we get to feel lost and then feel rewarded once we figure out what's going on. It's kind of fun to have that sometimes, and he fits that niche in comics world. He's not anyone else. He's not Bendis, you know, just exposing everything all the time. He's not anyone else.
I do like Will's comparison of Tom King, though. That feels like very different, and I bet it's way nicer to share a meal with Tom King than it is Jonathan Hickman. But yeah, it's the obfuscating, the truth in a certain ways. Our Matthew Rosenberg interview, that was a lot of fun to do, but the whole time I was just excitedly gearing up to get to ask him what Hickman's like at the end.
Yeah, I think he's doing that for his own purposes, but I think we do get to gain from it sometimes, as long as you're along for the ride. It's hard.
That style of storytelling I really enjoy, because like we've already said, it feels rewarding once it pays off. And I was just thinking about when the Witcher Netflix series came out, a lot of people didn't like it because I think it takes 4 episodes for it to really click for most people that, each of these characters is on a separate timeline. Because it doesn't really go out of its way to tell you that until it's no, he's now at a party with her mother. So
did it feel properly rewarding once you figured
I liked
it
it a lot. I mean, I kind of, they drop enough hints that I picked up on it in episode 2, but it's not super in your face obvious until episode 4. So I like it, but I know that was a barrier for a lot of people who didn't enjoy that kind of telling.
I think that this type of storytelling makes it helps it stand the test of time a bit more. I mean, and like The Witcher, like Game of Thrones or something, it's built in this way where it's more dropping you in the middle of something as opposed to starting out with, spoon feeding you every little bit of exposition and building it up. So if you think of it continue to think of it like a TV show, where some shows, the first season is really bland because they spend all this time trying to build the world and build the characters. And then if you think of Game of Thrones, since I'm stuck on that example, it doesn't quite start you out that. It starts you out in the middle of this world with conversations and things that are already happening. And you just kind of have to grab hold somewhere and go along for the ride. And then rewatching the first season of Game of Thrones after 3 or 4 seasons had huge payoff, and all the characters, you had a completely different perspective on them to be able to go backwards. And there's so many shows like that where you can, when it's done really, really well, you can go backwards and go, oh, that's that thing. Oh, that's that thing. So it pays off in layers of rewatching or rereading it when it's built this way, as opposed to just, holding your hand a whole bunch in the beginning. So yeah, it kind of sucks and it's confusing to start out the gate, but now you can go and read volume 2 or volume 3 and then go back to volume 1 and reread it and get a lot out of it that you didn't get the first time, and makes it, much more worth your time and money to have it.
Yeah, and luckily Hickman has the leeway to do that and to put out
Django, I'll be right back,
a bunch of issues over the course of 7 full years, and kind of have all that stuff pay off in the long run, where even Tom King, who had a really successful Batman run, got kicked off 12 issues early and had to kind of truncate some things and change what he was going for. So I think it's really, it's cool that Hickman was able to do this. I wouldn't mind if he was able to do it a little bit more. Just, I think his workflow doesn't let him finish stories all the time. And there are I don't know, there are a lot of comics that feel like this, in that they're the next level of trying to read something. It's not Bendis, who is a pretty straightforward storyteller.
What's something like this that doesn't do as well, or tries to make you confused and then accomplishes too much?
Can you? I missed a bit of that, but what's one that's like it that
does the world building and keeps you in the dark?
Plops you down in the middle and then doesn't actually pay off or isn't rewarding.
I don't know, man.
I haven't so far.
I haven't finished Wicked and Divine, but that was I had a problem about halfway through Wicked and Divine, where it felt like the world was so built and so lived in to Kieran Gillen and Jamie McKelvey, but no matter what, I kept coming back to this problem of not really fully kind of really vibing with anyone's motivation. I could understand the world and the chess pieces, but I didn't necessarily get why the pieces would be moving around the board. And it's an incredibly popular series, and I think it's a very good series, and it's gorgeous. But that was an instance of a series that for me, it just, I kept thinking like next issue, this is going to all click, and it never quite did for me. But that's actually kind of Kieran Gillen I love as a person in comics, but that's actually a thing that kind of consistently happens to me with his work.
That happens to me a
I
lot with Rick
understand that,
Remender
yeah.
too. Like
With
Rick
Rick Remender?
Remender, yeah, I will read the first 7 issues of almost any Rick Remender story, and then probably forget to read 8 through whatever. And it's not that it's bad. It's just that that something about it triggers me to drop off and not bother to go back.
I love him, but I could totally see that.
Yeah, it's totally me, not him. I mean, he's got some of the biggest.
Are you
fans.
breaking up with Rick Remender?
No, I'm not.
You,
I'm
Rick.
not. I just want to go back to where it feels like I'm trying to hold his hand for the first time again.
Listen, I can talk about Hickman forever. There's 170 episodes of podcasts where I've just been trying to do that. But Nick Dragotta, like, the art in this is gorgeous, and we touched on it at the beginning, and Frank Martin on colors, like, I love whatever is happening when they do the flashback art. It's just like, it's
what
those
is
like
happening?
It's
those
like a
Claritin
blue
commercials where they
hue.
peel off, like you're, or whatever,
Yeah.
Zyrtec or whatever. But like when you're watching it and all of a sudden they peel a thing off you didn't know was there. Like there's just some hue there that is gorgeous, and I can't describe it, but I love it. And one of my favorite panels of the entire series is in one of those. I'm gonna try and find it while people hopefully talk.
But yeah, like I say this with much love because it's done so well. It makes me think of like an Instagram filter almost.
Yeah,
100%.
I
Yeah.
was going to say it's a softening pastel filter that's just applied not too much.
Well, it's definitely increasing contrast because you don't see anything.
Yeah.
You don't see any panels like this anywhere else where you just have a face on a background, and those are literally the only 2 colors there. I think that's super fun. Dragotta, whatever, does a really, really good job with faces. And I think he does it in more than one way, which actually kind of threw me off a little bit, because that first bartender scene where he in Atlas, or the bartender's name is Atlas or whatever, that was more comic-y, like the guy's face and even like the eye getting pulled out of him and stuff like that.
Yeah.
He just felt more cartoony in a way, whereas you go to like most of the Xiaolin stuff and it's like more regal and professional looking and high class, and that was really impressive to me.
For some reason, this
panel
in the first 6 pages.
No, it's actually in the latter bit of it. It's when
That's
we're learning
Xiaolin.
about Xiaolin's history, but the bit where we learn that the reason that Death loves her is because she had killed 100 people and then decided just to spite Death and not kill this guy. But like the image of her with the sword on the guy's neck looks like Ramon Villalobos or Frank Quitely. Like the line work of the dude's mask is like, between the coloring, the line work, and the perspective there, it's like one of my favorite panels in the whole first volume.
If you guys want to know what I think they're doing print wise, it looks like they're just not using any black. So anything that's black is built out of the other colors that they're printing.
Yeah, it's brownish.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's like a rich black without the K plate on all of those flashbacks, and then as soon as you get to the modern time, they're actually using black ink again.
It just feels like it comes back into focus.
Yeah, it's like full color sepia.
Dude, the architectural shots. Oh, sorry, Mike, please talk.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, when we're talking about color and character design and like detail or not detail, can I just mention the Crow? Just mention the Crow. It's best.
I
mean, mention the Crow and the Wolf all you want.
Those two I just love. And actually, Will, it reminds me of what you said. The moment where the fact that Death has been in love, like that's where everything kind of like, that's where I could put my foot down finally. Like, this is where we are. Okay, this is what the story is. But the line of dialogue when it's the wolf talking about like, oh, I know what motivates him. Like, it's love. It's the only thing that gives people, it's the earth chasing the moon, and that's why we have another day. It's the only thing that can cause somebody to move all the way across the world for the hope of finding it. And I was like, oh God, these two characters rule. Like, yeah. probably my favorite dialogue in the issue.
You know how lost this book made me? By the time I got to issue 4 or 5, whatever the first read through, I was so exhausted that I couldn't pay attention to what was on a page, that I did not catch either of those things when I read it through the first time.
It's a good bit of dialogue, but I do think I would encourage everyone to like take breaks with this series. Just like I read the first 2 issues and I was like, that's good for now. Like I'm gonna digest that for a day. Like I do think that, you know, much like the Watchmen television show or Breaking Bad or something, like it's an amount of work, just like you're saying. So the
I had a
architecture,
couple.
please.
I had a couple questions, and they're totally in line with like, especially what we talked about with last night, like things where I'm like, am I the one, or is Hickman not telling us this yet? We don't know what kind of a deal Death made, nor with whom.
No.
That's going to be where we head.
No,
okay. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
But probably with probably involved the Crow and the Wolf, or at least
that's why
whatever league of beings they are.
Mm-hmm.
When they said somebody said that they're probably from the Nation, was that from one of the 7 nations?
Yeah, the Endless Nation is one of the 7
okay
countries that's in North America.
Yep.
Yeah, they're part of the political groups.
Yeah, and you don't really get to see too much of them until like it's got to be like volume 3 or 4 where they really show up, but oh, they're so cool.
Also, I almost showed this to Django before we started recording, but in the back of the hardcover, here's just cover designs by Hickman.
That's awesome.
Like, just like process work of him, and his like Nightly News has 113 different covers he chose between, but like all of them are slightly different. But just like I love the color, just the big things of color in there of him trying to figure it out. I love that he puts as much process into these as he does.
You know, I do an amount of graphic design, and I probably have files like that sitting around that I would never show anybody because they're awful until you find the right one.
Yeah,
until you have a pedigree, and then you show somebody the worst work you've ever done, and it sells for.
That's why I saved it, baby.
I was going to say as well that thinking about it today, I've like first Hickman series I probably read was Secret Warriors.
Okay.
And just ever since then, I've had this impression that Hickman is a graphic designer who decided to write comics.
That is exactly what he is.
Because just the amount of graphs and symbols and, you know, core graphic design work that he puts into everything he does. Is just...
Yeah. Have you read Nightly News?
No.
He has 2 books that he did the art in.
Yeah, what was the other one, Jeff? Was it Transhuman?
Yeah.
Definitively, yeah.
Dude,
I read all
excellent
of them
face,
8
by the
years
way.
ago. I read all of them.
Great audio content, but excellent face.
It is. It's just a really interesting book, and especially when you realize that the guy that is known as a writer illustrated this whole thing, but he didn't illustrate it really from the perspective of a comic book artist. He illustrated it from the perspective of a graphic designer. So the whole thing feels like he's giving you ad pages almost, rather than an actual story, and it works really well in that specific context.
Yeah, Nightly News I think does it much better than Transhuman, which I believe is the other one, which is actually kind of a forgettable story. But Nightly News was what, like, he just submitted a comic book to Image, having never published anything or written anything. It was the first book that he wrote, and they were like, okay, cool, we'll make this. And then it was just off to the races, like he's been doing.
Because Image.
Yeah.
No wonder he has that complex where he just says, like, yeah, everything I put out is a home run. Of course they listen to me. Like, that's incredible, being able to pitch it like that. He just
reminds me of Steve Jobs. Like, I think you can view it as being an asshole, but I just fucking love it.
And I don't mean to like pigeon into one of those, because it's both and that's, I think, why it's so amazing, because there's a charm to him that isn't just, I don't know. I mean, I guess, yeah, I've told you this before, where it's like he's more comfortable to like if you've grown up liking other cocky people, which I have not.
I have not
And
either.
That's hard.
It would be hard to like him if he was wrong, though. Everything he's written that I've read, I'm like, well, I love it.
It's a home
Damn
run.
you.
Yeah.
What I do want to mention is the architecture in this. Like every Nick Dragotta building, so like the White Tower or the Black Towers or the Armistice. And I love that the Armistice is the spot where at the very beginning they sign the documents, like in the flashback, 8 pages in, and then an entire structure has been built around that. And it's where all of the 7 goes when they meet the new president. And you can see even the same little bit of ground has been preserved, but is now surrounded by this giant cybernetic building. And I love the way Dragotta does like just the stark black of a building, and then has the lights sort of define the angles. Like it's so cybernetic. The city that's like in the Grand Canyon, it's just all below ground. It's oh god, mwah, Nick, love it.
Yeah, and that location, you learn more about that in future issues, and it's pretty awesome to find out why it's like that.
Well, so we've been doing this for over an hour. I would love to please anybody in here who has a thought that they liked or didn't like or anything, get that off of your chest. Don't live another week without having expressed these thoughts. What do you want to say before we get out of here, everybody?
So I made a point last night as well that what helped me a lot in approaching the world building and whatnot in East of West was playing about 6 years of a tabletop RPG called Deadlands, which basically has exactly the same origin of it. That, you know, the whole story is about an America where the Civil War never ended because supernatural influence came in and basically made both sides retreat from the Battle of Gettysburg, and from then on it just becomes this fractured United States with a North and a South, and supernatural stuff going on all over the place. And East of West has so many notes that match that flavor. A lot of the characters that you meet could be Deadlands characters. It has the same mixture of sort of Native American spiritualism and kind of American biblical doom all mixed together. So if you like those notes and the alternate history vibe of East of West, Deadlands is definitely a setting and a world to look into.
I loved hearing you talk about that, because then it just made me think about that line of dialogue near the beginning of the first issue where they're talking about the alternate history, but they ultimately say that because the Native Americans had gotten this message and unified, the Union was now fighting a war on 2 fronts. And that line, I realized that the first time I was going through this book, I read all of that, and I read it all second time, and I was like, whatever. Matt, I'm excited for I think your second read through of this, if you give it, that. He seems to almost like, maybe for better or worse, like it's made to be read a second time, because then as I was reading that the second time, I was like, oh wow, the Union. So like Uncle Sam guy, whatever we're calling him now. He
Colonel
really
Uncle.
did. Yeah, I like that. Like that idea of he was from the South lived through all of this stuff when in our reality it didn't. So the idea of how the Union could lose, and it would be through fighting a war on divided fronts, like, fighting 2 opposing opponents. And I was just like, damn, you're a good writer, man. That's good.
Then the idea that kind of settled into a Cold War over time, that they remained separate nations but kind of had a bit of a tenuous alliance. Again, very deadly. I think in particular in East of West, the fact that they have the White Tower, which is obviously the White House, but it's a bit large, and the Black Towers, which is just so obviously an answer from the South of like, we'll have the Black House. In fact, houses, we'll have more of them. Even better.
Yeah.
So, Mike, you haven't read the second trade yet, right?
I've not. I've ordered it.
Okay.
Those are going out tomorrow.
Curious.
Anybody who wants to place an order tonight,
Yeah,
bringing things to houses tomorrow. So
I definitely need that. I'm gonna need some time to read this. We also have to decide if we're doing it next Monday or the next Monday, because planning and
Oh,
things.
we'll figure that out. It's all jazz music, baby.
I just
It's
need
all
like
jazz
a
music.
14
It's
days
not like I'm
notice to
going
read
anywhere.
4 issues of this.
Yeah, I know. I all of you who are parents right now, I just can't even kind of relate to what you're going through.
Yeah, well.
So best of luck.
Enjoy your free time.
We'll know.
So Mike, I love you said something last night when we were doing our little pre thing to this too. Of your perspective is cool and also very different than mine. And I'm so glad I also get to have it in here. But one of the things that you've touched on twice is the prominence of the idea that this started from a stalemate civil war. I'm curious if you have any hypotheses of whether or how that will matter or influence the story moving forward. Or if that really is just a unique origin that's interesting.
I think what's interesting to think about is how that has obviously had domino effects in the setting without it having been discussed or anything yet. But you have the representative from the guy called Freeman in the Seven, who's obviously the leader of an emancipated slave population. So at some point, even though the Civil War wasn't resolved, it was kind of resolved in the sense of the emancipation of slaves. And maybe that will have implications at some point. I just really want a lot of those little details that are hinted at in the first volume to get fleshed out more. I want to know about all of those 7 representatives and the nations that they're coming from.
Yeah,
well,
it does start paying off in the second and third volumes for sure.
Yes.
That single issue that came out called The World, which is a source book. I haven't read it yet, but it's just like giant dossiers. I don't know if you can see this because I don't have my camera thing, but it's got the Union, it's got pages about everybody, the Confederacy, it's got maps, it's got charts, it's got deets, it's everything. So
when is it meant to be read?
It's a great question. It's certainly within these first 15 issues. I don't necessarily think you're going to have anything massively spoiled. When would actually be a much more reliable.
I read it after I'd read the first 3 volumes. Because I read the first volume in trade, and then I saw volume 2 was coming out in hardcover. So I was like, okay, well, I'll just read the rest in hardcover because I'm gonna commit to this. But yeah, I read it after I finished issue 15. And then during my reread, I found myself just referencing back to it when something came up that was like, do I remember how that went? So I would say read the first 15 issues and then read the World one shot if you can't. I don't know if it's in any of the trades. I know it's in hardcover,
That's what I was about to ask.
but
If in any,
it came out December 10th, 2014. So,
and we might have some in our
yeah.
overstock.
So
that's the other thing. Like it might be. I bet there's copies still floating around either with you guys or probably we could find someone else who has some copies.
I bet it's in one of the paperbacks. I don't think Hickman would not make it a thing that could be counted. And seeing that it came out December 10th, that's just over a year and a half. So yeah, I bet it was about the end of volume 3 era. Like I bet that's when you'd want to get into it, but I doubt he spoiled too much in it.
Well, thank you all for doing this.
Thank you all so much.
Yeah.
This is us. It goes the other way. Like you organize this. You guys know that. This
we
is
don't
us
have a
just being
shop
able to talk.
be in, so we're just
but you
like,
get
does
to
anyone
talk.
remember us? Let's talk about comics, please.
Oh my gosh, this is the closest thing we get to a Wednesday to be able to actually talk about these books. It's pretty awesome.
Us too.
You're not allowed to talk to Jeff on Wednesdays.
Are you not?
No.
You can call me. You can Facebook me. I don't have a Facebook. Shit. You can Zoom me. I don't know. I'm around. I'm probably just playing Final Fantasy VII.
All right. Well, Win, Nathan, Mike, Matt, Will, thank you. Jimmy,
thanks for having us.
For helping out. Jeff.
Thank you.
I'm Django.
Yeah.
I'm Jeff. And I would love to see all of you and maybe even more here next week. Nathan, I'll do as many of these as you want. So if there's another non-East of West book, I'll do that too, buddy. So, but yeah, I cannot wait to read volume 2 of this is where I'm at. So
I'm
I'm
gonna go
set
out.
for the next 6, so.
Nice.
Awesome. I'm gonna go out shooting my def guns in the air.
And if y'all want to get a volume 2 in, you have till probably like early tomorrow afternoon, probably like noon is when I'll start doing deliveries. So place an order by then.
Okay, well, good night,
Okey-dokes.
y'all. Stay
Good night.
Bye,
safe,
everybody.
stay healthy.
Yeah.
Thank you
Stay
so
safe.
much. Bye, everybody.
Good night.
Adios.